I'm Ashton Addison from EventChain for Investmentpitch Media and FinTech News Network. And today on Blockchain Interviews, we have John Jefferies, the Chief Financial Analyst of CipherTrace. John, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Ashton. It's a pleasure to be here today as well. Thank you
Great.
for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. I'd love to start off the show by learning a little bit about the background on what is CipherTrace and how is your team making the cryptocurrency industry a safer place and the banking industry.
Sure, that's a great place to start. So CipherTrace is a blockchain analytics company. We work with financial institutions, banks, and exchanges and other types of VASPs to help make sure that their payment networks aren't being used for illicit purposes. So really what we try to do is we make the cryptocurrency ecosystem safe from crime. So if your crypto gets stolen, we can track it down. If you're a victim of fraud, we can help recover it. We also, we work very closely with regulators. We have good relationships with law enforcement as well. We're originally funded by the Department of Homeland Security, and we work closely with the SEC as well to help, the ecosystem stay safe. And I think, it's really important to appreciate the fact that, as an ecosystem, the cryptocurrency system lives, by the graces of the regulators. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we communicate with them what the risks are, and we help them to understand that it's really not quite as bad as many people think. So we do a lot of reporting, a lot of analysis to show trends in crime and trends and how things are getting safer. And I think the other big part, what we do is we help banks understand the risk profile of cryptocurrency businesses so they feel comfortable to engage with them as customers. Mm-hmm. Because as you know, sometimes when they can't get bank accounts, that's when some of the biggest problems happen.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And I've heard of people calling the cryptocurrency industry the Wild West, but I've also heard of people saying that it's not that bad. I'd love to hear your opinion on how big is the crime part of cryptocurrency industry, and how big is that market that you're serving?
Sure. Yeah, it's that's very much a misconception that there's a lot of crime. It truly was the Wild West 9 years ago. But crypto is over 10 years old now, and it's really grown up, and we're able to measure the level of criminality directly and indirectly within the crypto space. So we are able to trace and identify money flowing through illicit spots, so through dark markets, mm-hmm. ransomware, and things like that. One of the other things we're doing to help crypto be safe is I have an initiative we call the CipherTrace Defenders League, where we have graduate level students trained and certified on our analytics tool that help people recover funds in the case of fraud and theft.
That's really interesting, and that's great. And when you're working with cryptocurrency exchanges, say in Canada and in the United States, how closely are you working with them to make sure that they're following the compliance needed to protect the funds and the personal information of the users of those exchanges?
That's a very good question, Ashton. So we work with exchanges really in two different ways. So we work with them in our core business, which is we help them identify risky transactions. So we help them identify transactions that may be coming from illicit sources, or trace funds that may be of questionable sources. And actually feel safe about banking them. So we, for instance, DV Trading, who's one of the largest market makers of Monero, we help them understand the risk associated with it so they can take that Monero and still maintain a low risk profile. Simultaneously, so that's on the business side. Simultaneously, we're part of an organization called TRISA, the Travel Rule Information Sharing Alliance. And that is an organization that's focused on helping exchanges and other VASPs, as they're called, virtual asset service providers, comply with these pending laws that are a result of the Financial Action Task Force guidelines. So there's a series of laws that really make the cryptocurrency space behave a lot like the banking space, mm-hmm. in terms of communicating information prior to moving money.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really good to know. And I guess my next question surrounding that is, there are cryptocurrency exchanges that are quite popular that can station themselves into certain jurisdictions which are favorable. Maybe it's not inside of the US, but still serving those customers. Do you work with offshore or exchanges that are in small countries that are popular that aren't actually located in North America?
Sure, absolutely. The nature of cryptocurrencies in general is that it's very global. So we work with, the largest of exchanges such as Binance globally, right, which has multiple subsidiaries across the world to help them comply. And we also help, some of the smaller ones comply. I think, one of the issues, and we're starting to see the U.S. federal government take action is, if you're in one of these unregulated places, unless you're registered with FinCEN, you should not be doing business with U.S. citizens. And the long arm of the U.S. government reaches out and lets people know that.
And earlier on, you mentioned Monero, and I want to talk a little bit about privacy coins. There's Monero, Dash, Zcash, dozens of other smaller privacy coins which may have more or less anonymity than Bitcoin does. And some of those are, favorable for criminals because they're more anonymous. Do you, as a team, have extra precautions that need to be taken when there's different types of cryptocurrencies that have different consensus algorithms in terms of managing that illicit activity?
Sure. Well, let me just, start out by saying that, as a company, we are, deep privacy advocates. And so we believe in the right to financial privacy. And, honestly, most cryptocurrencies have less anonymity than cash does. For instance, you had Ryan on your show, and Dash and Zcash and Monero are all part of our Travel Rule Alliance. So they're helping make sure that, they can comply when they're on the institutional payment rails. But when individuals are exchanging currency or purchasing things back and forth, they should have a certain financial privacy. So we help, as in the DV trading case, we help them understand the risks such that, different regulators don't feel obliged to take a knee-jerk reaction. And, as we've seen in Korea, where they just yank them off some of the exchanges.
Definitely. And I'm glad that CipherTrace is taking that approach because, as you mentioned at the beginning, it's a small percentage of the cryptocurrency use that is illicit, very similar to how there's a small percentage of cash that's illicit, but there's lots of it, use it for legitimate purposes, right? And people can prefer whatever cryptocurrency or whatever method of transaction that they want. So I'm glad that those companies are working with you. And now, at the beginning, you mentioned that traditional banks and financial institutions are also getting involved, and you're working with them to help them understand the risks that are involved with these types of transactions as well. Could you talk a little bit about your relationship with the traditional banks?
Sure. We recently launched a banking product, and it's really it's called Armada. And CipherTrace Armada is a suite of products that help banks understand their cryptocurrency risk exposure. So if you were to ask most banks, if they do crypto, 98% of them are going to tell you no. In reality, they are, right? We've, in working with one of the top 3 U.S. banks, we've uncovered approximately $2 billion a year on their payment rails, right? So either being sent to cryptocurrency entities or received from them. So VASPs, essentially. We also find people in the dark markets using the bank rails for illicit MSBs. So we have an excellent case study on our website that covers one of these illicit MSBs, and you can see them advertising on the dark markets. They might say, hey, deposit $10,003.12 into this account, and I will give you Bitcoin at this exchange rate. And then when we go back with the banks, we see those sort of transactions actually occurring across those accounts. So we find there's really 2 types of banks: those that choose to try to manage and understand their risk and mitigate them and not do anything with respect to crypto. But increasingly, we're seeing more and more banks that actually want to engage in this industry, right? As it becomes a safer asset class, even some of the banks such as JP Morgan that said they would never do cryptocurrency, right, are now banking Coinbase. So it's increasingly becoming a major asset class, and that's forcing the banks to sort of sit up and pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing we're seeing is the advent of nation state based digital currencies. So
Mm-hmm.
the so-called central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing a lot of activity around that, which also, going back to my previous point, really highlights the importance of understanding the privacy components and where the limits are, especially in less freedom-loving countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting. And yeah, I think there are a lot more banks involved than they're letting people know, because I did see some recent studies that leaning into a third of banks at least are starting to hold these kinds of assets. And now, in terms of North America, or even in terms of the United States specifically, how important do you see the next 5 years for banks to step up and make sure that they're fully providing, all information analytics services, cryptocurrency related services, in the next 3 to 5 years?
That, once again, Ashton, another really, really insightful question. I think, just in this year, we've seen a lot of activity. We've seen the OCC, the Office of Currency, actually take action against a U.S. bank for failing to implement adequate anti-money laundering capabilities. So my Safra Bank in New York was faced with actions recently. I was discussing the Colorado case down in Los Angeles, where once again an unlicensed MSB was convicted, and he pleaded guilty and faces up to life in prison. So we're starting to see some very major actions. And while it's not crypto related, there was a banker just this once again in this last 6 months that had $450,000 in fines personally imposed upon him. So we're starting to see personal liability as well, which really makes people sit up and pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, so you also are working on an open source initiative that is dear to the hearts of the blockchain community, because they really appreciate open source and decentralized protocols. Could you give a little bit more information about the open source part?
Sure, absolutely. So we have launched what we call the Travel Rule Information Sharing Alliance, which is an alliance of over 50 different cryptocurrency entities and stakeholders that are focused on complying with this upcoming travel rule, as it's called, which is basically before a VASP, which includes it's obviously exchanges, but includes ATMs and other different sorts of market makers in the crypto space. Before crypto gets sent between the two of them and exchanged, that both parties must be in possession of the contact information and the account information of the other parties. Now, in a world where this is a very global environment with mixed regulatory and security and privacy regulations, it becomes a very risky thing to start to send your PII around the world. So part of the reason that we launched this initiative is really to enable a sense of privacy to be imbued in it, and to make sure at the very base level that strong confidentiality was a component of it. So what we've done is we've just taken some of the very best parts of so a lot of the founders and members of our team are deeply steeped in cybersecurity. So I've spent 20 years in cyber. So essentially what we've done is pull together some of the known good parts, things like public key infrastructure, certificate authorities, enhanced verification, that's used in e-commerce and communication today to enable VASPs to securely communicate with each other. So what we've done was we've created an alliance which now has over 50 entities. Today, Ripple just announced support for PayID and for Trissa. So Trissa is the initiative. The website is trisa.io. And it's an open source initiative, so an open architecture and an open source base that allows these entities to start to communicate in a secure manner. And also, we're working very closely with the regulators, both at a global level and at a national level in the US, to make sure that they are comfortable with the approach, once again, so we don't see overly harsh reaction by regulators, and they understand that the industry is doing their best to make sure that we comply.
Wow, it sounds like a great initiative, John. Thanks for the information on Teresa. Where can the viewers learn more about CipherTrace and how can they get involved?
Sure. So CipherTrace's website is simply ciphertrace.com. I encourage everyone to subscribe to our newsletter. It comes out weekly, and it only covers 2 or 3, 4 or 5 really highly relevant stories with some insights into why it matters with respect to the areas that we cover. So around regulatory issues and around risk with respect to crypto. And also we publish a quarterly cryptocurrency, anti-money laundering, and crypto crime report, which once again, if somebody is interested in some of the specifics, you can see exactly, we published in this particular report, the current one, which is free on the website, is you can see that the crime within the US was under 0.01% direct criminal deposits into cryptocurrency exchanges. And if you go there, you can also see which countries weren't so clean.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for your time, John. I will leave those links in the description box below. I appreciate you coming on the show, learning about CipherTrace, and let's follow up in the near future.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashton. I enjoyed it.